Kelly and Jeremy, who have written a brand new book. Kelly, will you show it?
Boom, boom, boom.
All right, on
Ooh,
Dudleyas.
ooh. It's a tome. I mean, you could hit somebody with this and hurt them.
You can. And it's well needed too. I mean, when's the last authoritative Dudley book?
Well, in my opinion, the the unpublished thesis by Reed, but that would have been like in the 50s, I think.
So it's been a long
But this has
time,
a thousand photos, so that kind of makes it a little nicer.
and I'm glad to say I even snuck in a couple. So
Yeah.
buy the book.
Steve, see, I wasn't bad off. Steve already corrected me. 1951 was the thesis, so I said in the 50s. So I think that counts, right, Steve? He's
Well,
he's not.
whenever
Yes.
you're ready,
You want me to share screen?
begin,
You want me
Kelly
to
and
see it?
Jeremy.
All right, let's
Oh,
have some food.
let me first introduce Kelly as if he needs an
Okay.
uh Kelly is what head breeder for Altman's, among other things. He's an
Mhm.
expert in agaves, aloes, as well as Dudleyas. He's a board member, and I'll tell you my one problem with Kelly. I visited Kelly. I was going to photograph his glorious specimen plants, but I get up in the morning and he's having coffee with Jeremy. And I wound up sitting and talking the whole afternoon because it was so interesting that I didn't get to do any photographs. So with that, not to set expectations low or anything, but one of my favorite speakers, with two of them, Kelly and Jeremy.
All right. Thank you for that. And Jeremy has been my leading force behind all the trips. He always, it used to be I would drag him, and now he drags me. But the reality is we seldom say no to going on a trip to go look for plants. So it's been a really great adventure, and it spurs me on, and I love that aspect of it. I'm trying to share a screen. Let's see how this works. I'm sharing
You have
screen.
it. I see it.
All right, and then I'm gonna go full screen here. All right, so just as a quick introduction for me, I'm gonna compress that down. I kind of do the aloe thing, hybridizing, and those are just a few of my unnamed new ones. And of course, sun glow and snow glow. And then of course, my best hybrids. This is my grandson. There he is looking a lot like me. And then this is one of my favorite Jeremy hybrids. Jeremy's really gotten into doing some of the finest agave hybrids in the world and becoming known for it. And this is a picture of my plant, but it's his hybrid. So, and there's some of his cute little hybrids. That was a few years ago, but just he's got the hybrids going too. So without further ado, there's our emails if you want to contact us. I'll leave that up. Dudley is on the edge. So without further ado, let's start this thing. So for an origin story, and it kind of fits well for both of us, because this was one of the trips that Jeremy and I did together, and you'll see the photos in a second, but these are just off the coast of Point Loma. And when I first discovered Dudleyas, I was teaching scuba diving. This is North Island of the Coronados Islands off Point Loma. And if you look down in the left corner, you can see a little boat that's harbored there. That's called Lobster Shack. And the next few photos are right on that little precipice there on those rocks. And you can see in the background, middle grounds and South Island also in this picture. It's about 11 miles off the coast of Coronados. But that was where I first discovered the Dudleyas. Well, Jeremy said, we got to go out and see this one again and get some more pictures. And so this is a picture I took with Jeremy. He's standing right next to me. You see the little guys in the ocean there. Those are the sea lions. and that's Dudleya candida. And
Yeah.
that kind of
So
got me.
it
What?
should be mentioned also that they're off Point Loma, but they're Mexican islands. And
Yeah.
on that previous picture, Kelly, with those seals in the water, they were all on the shore when we arrived, if you remember, and they barked and they barked and they barked at us when we jumped on. And as soon as we got on the island, they all jumped in the water, leaving all their little pups behind, and continued to bark at us from the water.
Yeah, we
But
were definitely disturbing nature to get these photos, but we kind of did it quick and jumped back in the water and got back on the little boat. I show this because a lot of people have this concept that the light green ones are somehow different. We know with Farinosa it can be green or it can be silver, and it's the same case with Dudleya candida on Coronatus. The green ones tend to be a little harder to grow, and they tend to be a little more selective where they grow on the island. They can't take the full bullet sun all the time, but again, the islands are fairly cool, so it's not that hard. But here's probably what it looked like underneath the water with the little guys down there. And this is a photo from Philip Kola and also a little pup underwater. Anyway, so we leave Coronados and head back towards the mainland Baja because, as he said, it's Mexican grounds, and jump all the way to the northern extreme of where Dudleyas occur. This is near Bandon, Oregon, and that's probably the northern extreme or close to it. They grow on the sea stacks. They're beautiful plants, but it's Dudleya farinosa at the extreme northern end of the distribution. The distribution runs all the way from this area in northern the northern range all the way to the very tip of the Cabo. And there's Dudleya farinosa. This is north of San Francisco at a place called Point Arena. There's the lighthouse. Fun thing about Dudley is a lot of times they occur in this coastal area. If you like lighthouses, you're going to see a lot of them when you're looking for Dudleyas because they're all along the coast of California. And also, this one is not named for Jeremy, but it could have been maybe. This is often occurs in the northern regions with Dudleyas and looks very Dudleya-like. It's also Crashula family. One thing I wanted to point out, this is a plant that we have that's pretty common in California and even in Baja. But what I wanted to share with this, how the corollary is that these two plants were within a foot of each other, and just how different the two flowers look, and yet the major flower components, the major parts of the flower, are essentially the same. The petal shape is a little different. The coloring pattern is different, where one has a kind of a circle and the other one has a star. But you wouldn't assume just because of those characteristics that they're different species, especially since they're growing so close together. Dudleyas do a similar thing. There's lots of variability, and it makes them very hard to understand. It makes it hard to write a book about it. And we argue incessantly about what cases and what things make a species. One of the plants that we have in San Diego is Dudleya brevifolia, and this is the most reduced Dudleya you can think of. The plants are not much bigger than maybe the size of a penny when they're full-sized, and can be as small as the size of a pea. And as they grow, they flower these little typical Crashula open star flowers, and that's a Torrey pine, and this is in Del Mar, California. This area right here where this population has been reestablished by planting of some plants, and recently, like several months ago, got burned pretty badly. The Dudleyas probably won't suffer much because they're in an area where there isn't anything, but the area around it, the pines and some of the chaparral got just torched. But there's the Dudleyas. And as you see now, the surface of the soil doesn't look like it did before when I showed the earlier spring plant growth. At this point, there's only flowers left. And this one does completely go vernal and completely disappears during the summer months. Jumping up the north coast is Dudleyas cespitosa, and this is the limekiln form in Big Sur. This is more southern form of cespitosa where the leaves are a little more flat. And this is what it looks like. This is near Vandenberg. This is Big Sur area, cespitosa. How the difference between cespitosa and farinosa will become more clear. Usually the biggest separation for us is that cespitosas tend to have this very French's mustard yellow color flower, whereas most of the farinosas are this soft straw colored flower. Again, flower color shouldn't be indicative of one species to another, but in this particular case, it's an easy identifier. Cespitosas usually look like this flower color. And this is the ones that occur on Morro Rock. Different look, but same essential flower, very similar leaf characteristics of some of the limekiln plants, which is like this. In the book, Jeremy took some nice photos of this too, and I got a couple of pictures of him taking a picture of this. It is precarious where we are. When I said that we titled this program Dudleyas on the Edge, when he was in position shooting this plant, it's like about a 40-50 foot cliff down. They do tend to occur in these places that if you're fearful of heights, you might not want to get the good picture. So it's a bit of a work. But there's cespitosa flowers up close. And then this is an early growth before the flower. Also the same plant, cespitosa, and also the same plant. So you can see there's incredible variability between the different ones. An interesting aspect is that calochortus often occur with them. And it's been my experience when I go looking for them, if I see calochortus, I'm more likely sure that I'm going to find a Dudleyas somewhere. They don't always occur there, but when Jeremy and I first hiked up to Fish River Canyon, we were trying to get, I think, Dudleya densiflora, and he's got some nice photos of that, in flower. And not all the Dudleyas bloom at the same season. So we made several trips up to that canyon, and we ended up finding, I think, Jeremy, 2 or 3 species of calochortus there?
Oh, there was at least 3, and we went, I think, one weekend and found a couple in bloom, and returned, I think it was a week or 2 later, and found completely new ones in bloom, and those previous ones weren't even flowering anymore. So
Yeah,
that makes it. It just goes to show it's difficult to know when to visit a site, when these things are going to be in flower, and the amount of work it takes to actually get all these beautiful photos of these plants in flower.
A San Diego one that we have, which is kind of unique, it also grows in Orange County, is Dudleya viscida. Viscid meaning sticky, and it surely is sticky. I actually think that the plant uses that stickiness as kind of a passive form of protection from insects, because I've often found ants stuck to it, and they can't move, so they can't farm the mealies and whatever insects are there. I have no proof of that, but I think it's a great defense. If you can't be crawled on, you're not likely to be farmed for the nectar. This is the flower of the plant that's on the right. It's a very lovely pink, open star-shaped flower, usually pollinated by flying insects, bees, etc. And here's another one growing on kind of a rocky conglomerate river compressed substrate. And there's another close-up of the flower. Dudleya viscida. One that grows up more in John Martinez's neighborhood. This is parva. I've had a really tough time getting parva pictures because, again, as Jeremy stated about being there at the wrong time, if you're too early, you get plants with flower stalks, and then you come back and bunnies or whatever animal, rats, have eaten off the flowers, so you don't get the flowers up in a particular year, or you come back too late and the flowers are all spent. So it can be difficult to get the plants, and you know, when we recognized 77 entities or whatever in the book, there was a lot of work because you have to find the plants, then you have to be there at the right time, and being there at the right time is a guess. You know, you go a little too early or a little too late, you miss. But a lot of the pictures represent repeated trips. One of the all-time favorites for Jeremy and I think, and this is actually a site that he showed me because I was aware of it, I just never had hiked down to this area, but this is in on the Big Sur coastline. And this is Farinosa. And I talked about how close it is to Cespitosa, but the flowers are decidedly different. And this was a trip that he and I made together. I took this photo. But there's a close-up of the flowers. I would also state in this particular area, there's a lot of poison oak. So do be cognizant if you're in hiking these areas looking for plants, what's around you. It's easy to get excited about what's there and not see the other things. But this gives you a real feel for what it's like and how beautiful the habitats are. And so as we wander around on these cliffs, here I am wondering, and Jeremy's and Nick were on the complete other side of another cliff, and they caught me taking pictures of something. But it is another reinforcement of Dudleyas on the edge and Dudleya hunters on the edge. And there's the picture I was taking. Again, one of Jeremy's sites that he took us to, this little rock stack out there, isn't impossible to get to. It's a little bit sketch getting up to the plants. You can see the plants pretty much center. There's large clumps of Farinosa, and they grow along these cliffs, usually in the vertical area to protect themselves. But there gives you a site. That's Hunter Martinez next to a very, very large clump of Dudleya farinosa. And this is a young plant. At that particular site, there's this lovely lichen that's kind of a moss brown yellow color that complements the colors of the plants. It's pretty amazing how close to the high water line these things can survive. So most people know farinosa means that white powdery stuff that's all over the leaves. If it's not there, that doesn't mean it's not farinosa. So maybe inaccurately named, but this is also Dudleya farinosa. If you could imagine, it would be maybe the form without the powdery, waxy protection. And what it ends up doing is making more of that red anthracite and the red pigmentation to kind of protect it from the sun. But these two plants weren't growing far away from each other, and they flower at the same time. You can see the flowers are about the same level of exertion and on their way to bloom, and they share genes back and forth. And when you do grow them from seed, you'll see some silver ones come out of the green batch and vice versa. Moving inland to San Bernardino Mountains, one of lovely population of Dudleya cymosa. Oftentimes they're associated with sources of water. And here is just the running pure water next to the habitat of this lovely cymosa in the San Bernardino Mountains. And it has these little white clusters of flowers. So this is on the rocks and in the little moss cracks next to a river source. Very, very lovely plant, but with a white flower. I think we refer to this as the white flowered cymosa. I think Stephen is possibly going to describe it either as a subspecies or maybe as a species on its own. And again, there's a lot of study to be done. There's a lot of different things to look at. The way the bracts are on the flowers, the shape of the flowers, the length of the corolla, all those things add into it. Further inland in the San Bernardino Mountains is a more typical cymosa with orange flowers. Also calochortus there as well. Love the associations. You want to talk about this one, Jeremy?
About, are we talking about the Simosa
Yeah,
or the Calicotis?
no, this.
Good point. Sure. Well, it's hard to believe that this is a Simosa when you look at all the other Simosa photos, and I think the jury might not be fully decided on that one either. It's sort of an in between Abramsii to Simosa. It's a beautiful little plant. Unlike most Simosas, it makes it can form clumps with just hundreds and hundreds of heads, and is really only known from about this one locality in the Southern Sequoia National Forest.
And then just up the river from there is this Calicotis. It didn't actually grow on the limestone, but it's in the same general area. This one is exciting for me because Jeremy followed up on this. I found this plant about 25 years ago, and it's a little tiny one, high altitude in the Sierra Nevadas. Here it is just starting to push flowers. You can see how cute it is. It's very tiny. That's my index finger, so you can tell that it's a little tiny plant. But he took the time, drive back out there, and he got this lovely flower. And it doesn't look like Abramsii to me. It's also at above 6,000 feet, right around 6,000 feet anyway. And it doesn't look like the Simosa that we showed previously. It doesn't look like Abramsii, but what is it? It's still a mystery. And we mention it in the book, but it's not named at this point. So where it fits, anybody's guess. But nice photo from Jeremy to get the flowers. Again, more Simosas. Simosas occur over a large area, and they're variable. This is up on the mountain ranges along the Big Sur coast. And this is Affinity pumila, or close to pumila, but these are the more silvery ones. And then there's the glabrous form. These do grow really close to each other. I can't imagine them being different species. It's just when you put chalkiness all over it, it gives you a completely different look. But the red is really that red. It's not been augmented. And anybody that's seen them will attest to it, but anybody that's seen a picture will say, oh, those are too red. So wouldn't you agree, Jeremy?
Yes, I would agree. But I think there's a lot of people out there who are happy to disagree to possibly create new things in botany.
Yeah. See, but here it is with the silver looking like pumila. So, and even the pulverulescence, I don't think that's a fungal thing. I think that's just the chalky, waxy on the flower that gives it kind of a different look. You're up, but
Well, yeah, this is Simosa cribrifolia. So typically this was not my find, but I was lucky enough to get a tip from James Davis about this population of recently found Simosa cribrifolia, which are never, just like you were saying, sometimes they're white, sometimes they're not white. This is a white form of Simosa cribrifolia. Typically, the ones I've seen in the past have been a dark green to almost a brownish on the leaf, and that's just the exciting thing about Dudleyas and many other types of plants is that there's still so much out there that we haven't seen.
yeah, and the form that I knew as cribrifolia, as he said, was this olive green thing, but the structure and the shape of the plant, everything else about it is the same. So really the only thing difference is one is kind of painted white and the other one's kind of an olive green. So the flowers being the same, the bracts being highly compacted, hence the name. And this is a Simosa in San Diego, northern San Diego County.
Yeah, this is Simosa. Well, I mean, it's not, there's not been a lot of testing on it at all, or nor has it been very well studied, but it seems to fit into Simosa, whereas Simosa was not thought to occur in San Diego County up until recently, but as far as I can say, this is most likely Simosa in San Diego County. And yeah, these are near Palomar Mountain. So in a very difficult to reach population.
Difficult because of the terrain and because of Poison
extremely
oak too, right?
Yeah, extremely steep and on native land. And the path consists of ropes to climb up and down. So it's very challenging. Yeah. The first time I did it, I actually had I was very excited about it. I had found the write-up on it in the San Diego Natural History Museum's website, and didn't know of Simosa in San Diego County, so went to go take a look. And it was winter. It had been raining. It was very slippery, and there was these rope trails. And I had my young daughter on my back because I was watching her for that day. So going up and down that was very exciting. But it's the things you do for plants. So
Yeah, I've been in similar situations where I've had my youngest on my backpack while I'm hiking these cliffs, and people think you're out of your mind, and we kind of are. But I usually try to leave them at the top if I can. One of my favorite little Simosas is not necessarily great for cultivation. I guess it could be. Is this little miniature form, and this is in San Gabriel Mountains. This is Simosa subspecies marcescens, and it also grows in these little nooks and crannies in moss patches on fairly vertical substrate. But I mean, marcescens isn't a bad name. I would have gone with like Porphyrostaches or something for the flowers, because the flowers are just like on fire. But very tiny little plants, to give you an idea how small they can be. That's my thumb and forefinger, and you can see that's a mature plant because it's pushing a flower. So really tiny little Simosas, stretching the range of it. Just near Ventura, a little bit south, is Dudleyas verdii, and beautiful plants. We caught this one in full glorious early flower on a little rock knoll with lots of lichens just perched up there ready for photography and on a blue sky day. Beautiful little silver stars all over. This plant has been endangered because of some mining activity in the area. Also, there was some bad fires that affected it, but I've still seen it in a couple of areas, and it still seems to be healthy and hanging on. Dudleyas verdii, named for David Verdi. Tag boy.
Dudleyas arizonica in Anza Borrego Desert. So yeah, very beautiful plants, very heat resistant plants, and highly variable when compared to what is considered Dudleyas arizonica that's found in Baja and in Arizona. But very similar looking to pulverulenta, but a more diminutive inflorescence, as you had mentioned earlier.
You can see in the back splendens, Fucaria splendens, so you can tell that this is a dry environment. And as you move from pulverulenta in San Diego County to more hot, dry environments, it seems to have some in-betweeners. At one point, it was Dudleyas pulverulenta subspecies arizonica, and it's now been raised to species status. Not questioning that, because the flowers are different. They tend to not have that nodding snake-like head, and the flowers are smaller. But when you get in areas where you have pulverulenta and arizonica, and you have areas that are in between that, you have plants that are in between that. So it becomes a little bit of confusing thing. Here's another picture of it in Rainbow Canyon. Now, this one is what I think is true Abramsii calcicola, and it's a very tiny plant. It seems to be locked to the limestone features where it grows. It stays very small. Not far from this, you find more typical Abramsii. I think they've kind of been conflated with each other because they're in the same general area. The Abramsii tends to grow more on granitic substrates, and this is limestone. And if it were just a plant that happened to occur on the limestone, you'd expect it to grow on the DG that was down below the limestone or to the side of it, and it doesn't. So I do think this is a distinct subspecies of Abramsii, but it's an interesting plant. The plants are pretty tiny because they're growing just in pure limestone. They're only about 3 inches tall when they're flowering, and maybe only 1.5 inches from the base to the top of the leaves. And then we shift to a sunset picture near Laguna Beach. This was one of the protected plants, Dudleyas stolonifera. Here it is an early bud growing on the slopes. There's about 5 locations in and around Laguna. And this is the picture that's in the book. Again, in bud. They tend to grow on vertical, and for that reason, it's hard to get to them, which is good. That helps protect them. Moving along, this is all the way out in Anza-Borrego, Saxosa aloides, growing here with Echinocerius. What is beautiful about this plant, in my mind, not much, is it's aloides, because I guess the leaves look maybe aloe-like. I'm not seeing that. I don't think that would be the first thing that comes to mind. But what is interesting is that the flowers tend to be green. It doesn't show as well in this picture, but this is in the Anza-Borrego, and the flowers can be really, really green. And what I find is interesting about the green flowers is that sometimes in that area, the acanthides, phaerocactus, have these green flowers too. So there's obviously some kind of pollinator in that area that is attracted to green or driven to green, because a lot of plants in that area tend to have these greenish flowers. It'd be something that'd be an interesting thing to study. Why are these plants blooming green? Green doesn't seem like it's a color that you would drive to attract a pollinator, but maybe it's on some level something to do with it, because this was with Saxosa aloides. This is a campground in Baja. This is a trip that Jeremy and Tony and Jeff and I made. And this is kind of what you do when you have to go out and looking for plants. It was a great trip, and we saw lots of Dudleyas and our other love. But this is Dudleya attenuata, and this is our other love. That's a Jeremy find, beautiful agave shy. And this was a find that I made. I would argue those are not your typical agave shies, but gorgeous nonetheless. So if you're out looking for Dudleyas and you find these, you got to take some photos of these as well. Then we verge into Dudleya brittani, and this is south of Tijuana, north of Ensenada. This is Dudleya brittani in habitat. And you can see the variation. The one on the right has kind of an incurved, hard-shaped leaf. The one on the left looks more like typical brittani with the red pointed bracts. Here's the curved leafed the incurved one. These plants can be variable from green to silver to in between, as they're pictured here in habitat. There's even one at the top of the screen that's clustering, looking more like maybe like Candida. What's happened recently is that Dudleya brittani has been broken up into, I think, 4 different species. I have a difficulty with it, and it's discussed in the book. The reason I have a difficulty with it is because they're growing together and they're flowering together and they're continuing to share genes, and the flowers are very similar. So I don't see how, I mean, Dudleyas do occur together and they're different species. Generally, there's a separation in flower time. There's a separation in flower shape, so it attracts a different pollinator. These, I just don't see it any more than I see it with Candida or Farinosa, but to each his own. This is more of the southern green form of what we used to call Dudleya brittani, growing here with Dudleya campanulata. Interesting fact about these, campanulata doesn't bloom until I think almost into June, and the brittani, or the green brittani, blooms about maybe a month and a half or 2 months before that. So there's very little crossover and likelihood that the two would cross. But I suppose it's possible if you had a real early campanulata or a really late brittani. Here's how they color up, because again, they don't have that waxiness. They, in the middle of summer, they turn this bright, deep red. And there's what it looks like when it's in flower. and right above the ocean. Almost looks Echeverria-like, doesn't it, Jeremy?
Absolutely. I believe that's out at Punta Banda.
Mm-hmm. And there you can see the Dudleya campanulata on the right has just little tiny beginnings of flower. And the pictures in the book, Jeremy went down there late in the season and got some good flower pictures of it. We didn't have flower pictures of it because we'd always made our trips earlier to get the Brittany in flower. But you can see one is clearly open and full. The other one is not even thinking about blooming yet. More the incurved one. There's a friend that I do some Dudleya traveling with, Kevin Krucher, and this goes back to the title of the program, Dudleyas on the Edge. It just looks like he's standing in front of the ocean at these Dudleyas. It's about a 300-foot cliff. This is down near Colonette, and this is out on the mesa. But that cliff is probably one of the most formidable cliffs you can imagine. It drops pretty much straight to the ocean. I would not be standing where he is, but I hope I'm not getting him in trouble by saying that. Dudleyas on the Edge. Also in Punta Banda, which Jeremy just referenced, is this little hardly known plant, Anomala. It's not terribly spectacular. It is definitely a species. The flowers are different. They don't look like the daisy. Here, the picture is the plant in bud. It's not in flower. I didn't get it in flower. I think we ended up using in the book, somebody had gotten some pictures of the flower either in habitat or in cultivation, but it's one of the ones that's a little more difficult to get everything. But here it is in habitat, growing in the lichens on pretty steep vertical cliffs above the ocean on Punta Banda. As we move further south in Baja, this is south of San Quintin, and we found this population of plants that were really kind of interesting. They have this really light green color, and they even look a little pachyphytum-like. They're clearly not pachyphytum. They're not related to pachyphytum. They're probably just a variant of the thing that we've been calling flaviflora for its bright yellow flower, but a little more rounded in the leaves and a little more chunky. It just gives you a different appearance and a different look about it. Here's another plant of it. Lovely environment, really wonderful place. So one of the things that we wanted to do is go see Crassifolia, which was discovered down Mark Tadero, I believe, and Steve McCabe wrote it up. But this is in the genre of the tiniest Dudleya blockmani. It's another one of those flat pan growing plants. And the one on the left you're seeing there with my hand, those are extended flower spikes just starting to get to the point where they're just going to start forming some flower buds. The actual plant, you can kind of see here with the flowers, when it's not in bloom, it looks like that. I mean, it looks very much like maybe some South African cryptic succulent, but it grows in these little pans with rocks that look very similar to it. And just a super interesting plant, another oddity in the genus, Dudleya crassifolia, looking like a crashula. And in that same area, there's a lot of ants, and these guys love the ants. So we found these guys, and it was in that flat pan area. We found many horned toads there. Tag. This is Anthony I and the volcano.
Sure. So Dudley Anthony growing near San Quintin as well in northern Baja. Very pulverulenta or Brittany-like, closer to pulverulenta in the flower colors. They both have these red flowers. I don't know if you have a photo of the flowers or not, Kelly. But Anthony tends to get very long trunks and very long extended inflorescences that can be 3-4 feet long typically. Whereas pulverulenta, which you often find on road cuts and growing on cliff sides, tends to have a much shorter inflorescence, but obviously very closely related plants. But these grow on beautiful black volcanic rock in northern Baja. And they also are an absolutely huge population of plants but only really grow in that one small area of Baja, near San Quintin and on an adjacent island right off the coast of San Quintin. So if you want me to take this as well, this is Dudley Rubens. Rubens grows, it's a little higher elevation Dudleya, growing in the mountains of central and southern central Baja California. It's an absolutely beautiful little Dudleya, and it's good for people that it doesn't grow at the coasts. So if you live anywhere like I do, where there's heat, where you're a little more inland, I've had quite a bit of success growing Dudleya Rubens.
It's a heat lover.
Yeah.
I kind of trended into these. These are a little bit oddities. We found these plants among Dudleya Ingens. And where I was going with this is that Dudleyas, for the most part, are much more subtle than Echeverias as a group for color to the leaves, but they can have color to the leaves. It's pretty astounding. We've already shown you the whiteness of the Brittanyes and the Farinoses and the red touches on the older leaves. And they can get these flushes of red. These are like Ingens in Baja, but kind of weird ones. Another one is Gatesii, which is also a Baja endemic, and it grows in central northern Baja Norte, and it can get these violet colors, these kind of lilac purpley kind of colors, and also pallid, kind of almost cream colored rosettes. And another one that does it is this is a good picture of Dudleya arizonica, and growing in the hot, dry areas, it is colored up nicely with that kind of pinky color that you see only in some Echeverias. So when we were down in Baja on the trip before, maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, I found this Zeltnera species, which is probably a different species because the center of the flower, if you notice, is different than the one I showed at the beginning of the program. And I just think it's interesting to notice these changes that we sometimes don't look at so much, but this is obviously far geographically removed from Del Mar. This is down in Baja. But again, very similar. You recognize it as that other species, but the inner floral parts are different. So I could identify it. And one of my all-time favorite photos, repeating it, but there's Jerbear. This was the agave that we found in Central Baja on a trip to look for Dudleyas. And gotta love the squigglies. This is Fish Canyon, I believe.
Yeah, so this is the area we were talking about earlier when we were looking for Calicortis. I stumbled upon Calicortis, I should say, trying to get this species, Dudleya densiflora, in flower for photos. Densiflora is a beautiful plant. It's got very long tubular-like leaves and only grows in a few canyons outside of Los Angeles in the San Gabriel Mountains.
And then here's a shot of the close-up of the flowers so you can get an idea where it got the densiflora name. The flower is very open star-shaped, insect pollinated, not tubular like hummingbird, not red, white, but interesting. And it's an appropriate name for it, densiflora. Also similarly shaped flowers is this species that grows south of Tijuana along the coast. This is Dudleya formosa. It's one of a couple that have these pink flowers, and this is a very exceptional, pretty flowering plant. The rosettes are green and don't look that distinct, but it does cluster and form clumps, maybe anywhere from 6 to 8 inches across to maybe 2 feet across, and lovely pink flowers. Now, what's interesting about these is that this is a very large Dudleya, and this is Dudleya brittani in habitat. I bounced some light in it, give you an idea. What I would point out is that the bracts on it are kind of arrow-shaped and pointed, and the flowers are kind of a yellow to sometimes a lighter yellow cream color. In full sun, the bracts tend to turn red. in comparison to Jeremy's photo here of Pulverulenta. A lot of people get these two plants confused, and there are a lot of differences about them. If you look at the bracts on this one, they're more discoid. They're like little circles with a point on them. And they also have a much thinner look to the leaf. And the most interesting thing about both of these is if you grow both of them, you'll probably be able to grow Brittany a lot easier. It grows very coastally. It gets a lot of fog. It doesn't rot out in the, when it gets a little too much moisture. Pulverulenta is not so easy. If you water it during the summer, oftentimes it'll say goodbye. I mean, it just disappears. And it's an important distinction. You'd think something like Pulverulenta, which is widespread, it occurs all the way from Paso Robles way down into Baja, you would think that that would be an easy to grow plant. And it actually is, but you got to plant it in your dry areas on a rocky area and just leave it alone in California. And in other areas, if you have dry areas, it'd probably do really well. It wants mostly winter rainfall and a dry summer rest, and it curls down almost to nothing. What's also interesting is when you put the two together, you get plants that have hybrid vigor and are great for cultivation. This is in the hillside and Vista, and this is it as well. This is combining Pulverulenta with Brittany. And you can see what a monster they can become in terms of flowers. I think this one had 16 flower shoots coming out of it, and it's one rosette. So just an amazing plant in cultivation when you hybridize these. And that's the only reason I would suggest it. Flaviflora, which I mentioned briefly earlier, it does extremely well in cultivation. It has bright yellow flowers. Here it is at two different times. This is a little earlier in spring when it's in bud, growing in cultivation. You can give an idea how big it is. You can see a Villamorniana in the background. So it's a big cluster. And there's the close-up of the yellow flowers, hence the name. Now, this one hasn't been formally named. It'll probably get named. It won't be Flaviflora, but we're waiting for that to happen. So it'll be interesting to see. This is Cespitosa in cultivation. So some of these plants have a lot of application to our gardens, and they make beautiful plants. This is growing in Vista, and it does quite well in the ground. And as long as it's got decent drainage, it goes crazy. As does Farinosa. This is Farinosa planted in DG next to a rock in Vista. So you can do more than just look at them in the wild. You can grow some from seed, which translates quite well. Now we're looking at the Channel Islands a little bit. And Jeremy can speak to this because he's been there. This is Josh Allen's photo.
Well, I believe this would be Santa Rosa Island, and this is Dudleyas, and Dudleyas is a diminutive, very well similar somewhat to Dudleya greenii, but much smaller plant and only grows on one small section of the island. This is actually a great plant for cultivation. I grow this and water it like, Kelly was mentioning a minute ago about Brittany and Pulverulenta and which one's easier to grow. And you would think Pulverulenta, since it's so widespread. However, Brittany, even though it only grows in one small area, is the easier one to grow. And yeah, I grow my Brittany's. I water them year round and they do well. And the same with these Dudleyas. They can handle water year round and look quite good, even though they just grow in this dry little rocky area of Santa Rosa Island.
I think it has a lot to do if they have a coastal influence where genetically they've been getting fog and moisture at all times of the seasons and years, that if you were sensitive to that, you would cease to exist. And so the ones that are more proximal to ocean environments like Brittany and like this one, which is right next to the ocean, I think that they're less upset by getting water at the wrong time of year. One of our trips that we've made many times is to Cedros to see this beautiful plant. And it's been the subject of a lot of poaching and the subject of a lot of controversy and even some terrible stories that go deeper than that. But the plants are still there, and they still seem to be doing just fine. Where they grow in large numbers, lots of seeds in the ground. So even if they were to take every plant from the wild, it would recover eventually because the seed bank in the soil. I would hope that wouldn't happen because it's a very easy plant to grow from seed, and it doesn't grow exceptionally well from cuttings. And so what a lot of the poachers were doing is they would take a clump and slice it up into a bunch of heads, sell the individual heads, of which a lot of them died. But this is Dudleya pachyphytum for the fat leaves that it has on cedros. And there's a Jeremy shot of it and another cute one. Look at the chunky one down right lower center. And you can tell the kind of environment it lives in when you see those lichens. It gets fog all the time, and it's fog fed, and it's right on the area where the clouds come in and hit that island. Also on the island is this little form of Dudleya albiflora. Recently, the smallest form has been described as Dudleya delegodilii by Steve McCabe, but this is albiflora, and it can be a cute little pointy little plant, and it can even bloom pretty small. That's probably about 2.5, 3 inches tall, not much bigger than that. Where albiflora occurs on the mainland, it looks more like this. It's still the same species, I believe, but again, flower stalks usually about twice as high. And this is a Jeremy shot.
Yeah, that was down in the Seven Sisters area.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as I was mentioning earlier, there's so much we haven't seen out there still. You know, we found these far inland at a site I wasn't aware of, and they actually took some resemblance a little bit to Dudleya gatesii, which grew nearby them. But Dudleya albiflora is very widespread Dudleya. It occurs on both sides of the Baja Peninsula, on islands of the both sides of the peninsula, and all the way up to about halfway up around Cedros and mainland Baja California on the Pacific side. A huge range, and potentially going to be split up quite a bit in the future.
Another one that is kind of considered to be an island plant is this one that occurs on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. And although the Palos Verdes Peninsula isn't an island like you think of it, hence the name Virens insularis for this one, it is surrounded by a low flat plain on all sides and ocean on the other sides. But this is Dudleya virens, subspecies insularis. And those are clusters of it on the rocky sandy hillside. And that's kind of what it looks like where it lives. But here's a really pretty shot of it. It's a lovely plant. It's a great garden plant. It's easy to grow. It is long lived in cultivation. The flowers aren't really showy, but they're interesting the way they have this often have this tree-like structure flower where it has these side appendages that come out of it. But Dudleya virens, subspecies insularis. Dudleya abramsii, this is probably one of the biggest ones. This is San Diego County one. Josh showed me this plant, and it's not showy at all. It's hard. This one's called often the mouse Dudleya because it's kind of got mousy yellow brown flowers, and it's not a showstopper, but it is an interesting plant, and it definitely is got characteristics that make it abramsii. Here's a small plant of it, and you can see the kind of tan colored flowers on this little two-headed plant. And then this is it when it grows a little further up into the lower Sierra Nevadas. This is just what I want to say, east of Bakersfield. But at the same locality, we found this color flower. So flower color not being diagnostic, what's more diagnostic is the shape of the flower and the leaves. Up in the Cuyamaca Mountains, you have this rock formation. This is San Diego. And at the base of these rocks, you have a plant that is pretty interesting. I would say it fits well into lanceolata on the small side, but I think it was what was named delicata, and I said perhaps a yellow form of lanceolata. Anyway, whatever it is, it's an interesting plant, and pictured here so you can see it. There's the flowers on it. It does have some characteristics of the flowers that make me think lanceolata, like that white rib on the back of the flower petal, and the shape of the flower. But also, once again, hello again, Calochortus was growing with it. I took Denise up there. We were on a hike, and I didn't see this plant. She found the Calochortus, but it was growing about maybe 10 feet from where I was photographing the previous shot of Dudleya. And this is just a really nice clone of Calochortus. Wonderful plant. This is Abramsii, subspecies of Phenis. Thanks, Steve, for the help on finding this one. Hiding in rock scree. What a great place for this to hide. The topography here isn't very steep. This is up in the Big Bear area. Very difficult to know where to look because there's so much rock scree up there. You'd never find it without some good information. But what I found interesting is Dudleyas hide because they're usually tasty. So they either hide on a cliff or in between rocks, or in some places where something doesn't just obliterate it. And these kind of pull down in the rock scree so you can't even see them until they push flowers up above the rock scree and you can get pictures of them. On the way down, we saw the white flowering Simosa, which was at its absolute peak. I've never seen it so nice, a white flowered Simosa. Then this is in Orange County, yet another form of Simosa. Much more widespread, probably with all the plants that we've shown being slightly different. There's room for some of these to either be given subspecies status or maybe even full species status. More work to be done on this group. Dudleya multicaulis growing in kind of this mud, different substrate than a lot of the other Dudleyas. And this is an interesting plant because it's similar to some of the Hesianthus type Dudleyas, the brevifolias, similar to some of the way that parva behaves, where by the time you see the flowers, you don't see much of the plant. So here it is in early growth, just pushing flower stalks. And here it is in flower. Where's the plant? The plant's gone. All you have is flower stalks and flowers. And eventually all you'll have is a dried bunch of flower with seed. It puts all its energy, pulls it out of the leaves like a lithops, essentially, and puts it into flower production. And I just happen to have a ladder in my backpack. This was a shot that Kevin took of me taking a picture of a Dudley up in the San Gabriel Mountains, and there's the shot. So you get an idea of what you go through to get a picture of a plant. Sometimes you have to get up to it to do it, and sometimes you can do it with a long lens. Sometimes you bring a ladder along. There's the flower. And then this is kind of funny. He's got a really nice lens. This is my friend Kevin, and we were out hiking to go. Too expensive a camera to fall. Yeah, that's what I kept telling him. Too expensive a camera for him to fall. But on the right side, he takes this leap and almost takes it into the water. I thought for sure he was going down with that camera, but the camera's good. And here's what we were shooting. This is the Dudleya Simosa ovatifolia, growing in these little rock cracks that have been wind-blown, carved by wind, and then little pockets of soil and leaf stuff gather in those little pockets, and somehow that plant finds its niche there. So a really cool plant. Bouncing all the way up to south of Carmel, north of Big Sur. This is kind of what the coastline looks like. And these are some more of the Dudleyas that grow there. This is Simosa pumila. Again, Simosa pumila. Just variations. Can't have too many of these pictures. This was a beautiful picture that Jeremy took. This is in the book and just captures everything of what attracts me to Dudleyas: the ocean, the rock, the geology, and the plants and the flowers. So north of San Francisco, there's this little rock outcrop that we visited. It's not far from Mount Tam, but there's a little diminutive form of Farinosa. And I say little diminutive, it kind of almost looks like just a little echeveria, little rosettes, maybe an inch across, maybe an inch and a half at most. But it's still Farinosa. And here it is in habitat on those little rocky outcrops. And there it is in full flower. But you can see how much littler this is. But just because you're little doesn't make you a different species. And gives you a good example. That's my thumb and forefinger on both sides of the rosettes and clusters. But back to the one that I showed you, there's the one that Jeremy, that's the population Jeremy showed me, and that's my wife Denise. And there's the little one. And a lot of people push back and say, oh, those can't be the same species, but they are. One's tiny, one's large, but their flowers are the same. So one's just been pushed a little harder, if you will. And just pretty flowers. If you get a chance to go see Dudleyas, try to get them when they're in flower, because they're just really pretty. They have all the colors you can imagine, yellow, all the different shapes, just really beautiful things. So believe it or not, this is a Dudleya that occurs on sand dunes. There's several localities in California where Dudleyas occur in sand dunes. But this is actually on the Coronados. I mean, on the Silver Strand, Coronado Island, growing in the sand dunes. And beautiful flower, but lanceolata nonetheless. I think this is just lanceolata that chooses to live in sand. And then this is the recent discovery. Jeremy can talk more to it. I haven't been to the locality, but here's a couple pictures of the flower and the plant. And this is in San Diego County. And there's Jeremy's shot of it. It's a beautiful new Dudleya.
Yeah, so you know, once again, as I mentioned earlier, there's still a lot to be seen in Dudley, and even in our own backyard. I think it was James Davis and Josh Allen who did the footwork and found this plant and brought it to my attention and Steve McCabe's attention, and I believe they're working on describing it now. It is absolutely gorgeous little plant. Most of them flowered more orange-like. This one was a standout sort of cherry red-like flower on with the white leaf. Just was a nice contrast, and had a beautiful view of the surrounding mountains that I hesitate to say where exactly until the plant is described. But exciting, extremely exciting plant.
Safe to say, not an easy one to get to. That's why it's new.
No, not easy at all.
Okay, so one of the things I wanted to help some of the people that are trying to grow, the best time to see them, anytime, but when they're in flower, it's best. It depends on the species. Some bloom as early as February down in lower Baja, and some as late as September in the higher mountains, and in the northern area of the region, they bloom in August. Like in Oregon, you can find a Farinosa blooming in August. It typically, early in the year in the southern distribution, this time can shift. So when people say they give you bloom range times, the reason they give you bloom range times is because if we get early rains, that changes things. If the weather stays cool, that pushes it out. If it gets hot really early, they bloom earlier. So you can't really be certain. And again, it was one of the hardest things about making the book and making it good was that we had to keep going back and visiting these things until we got the flowers. We do have a distribution map in the book. This is half of it. This is only part of it. And Dershing Helmer helped me with this part of it. It wasn't intended to be where to find Dudleyas, so we didn't pinpoint any localities. But if you found a Dudleya in these areas, you'd be able to know probably which species or a couple of species it could be. And then, of course, the book will help you identify that with flowers. Growing them in cultivation, I would suggest starting with easy ones like Farinosa, albiflora, Brittoni, Virens, Edulis, Visita. They're all easy to grow. And if you have some success with them, you'll end up probably being more encouraged to grow more of them. Most of them are winter and spring growers, and they respond well to cool, wet weather, which is the antithesis of most echeverrias. Echeverrias generally are monsoonal. They want their moisture when it's warm. They do good in a greenhouse. Some of the more inland Dudleyas can take more heat and probably would appreciate a greenhouse in cooler climates. They usually want a summer rest. Again, if you water some of the Dudleyas at the wrong time, which is summer, you may not see them again. They may just disappear. Surprisingly, pulverulenta, we mentioned this before, lanceolata, even though they're widespread and quite ubiquitous, they often die in cultivation. They're hard for people to keep going. Try growing them from seed, because that gives you a lot more plants to work with and to find the best place for them. If you have one plant and you kill it, you only learned what you didn't do right. And if you have 3 or 4 and you have them in different parts of your yard with different exposures, you can obviously see what is the best conditions for them. Here are some seedlings at the nursery where I work. I would guesstimate that's 10,000 or more Dudleyas. These are mostly Farinosa, and we grow them from cultivated seed, from stock plants. And there's what they look like up close when they're babies. I would encourage you not to collect plants in the wild. Get them from a source. Get seed if you can. There are some seed dealers that do sell Dudleya seed. It's very small, but don't be intimidated. A lot of it grows quite easily. This is my helicopter Dudleya pulverulenta photo, which is at the end of the book. This is what they look like, pulverulentas look like near the end of the season. I'd also note that, see how everything is dried up and everything is kind of like dead, dry grass and chaparral? It's going to stay that way until the winter rains come. And that's kind of what this plant needs. So you just get some clues from what the environment provides. And then this was some of the artwork for the book from Dershing. This is also a Stephanie Law's picture. I didn't put this in the book, but I would have liked to. It's a beautiful, beautiful photo painting. Leaving you from Bend in Oregon. This is the rock stacks. They grow on the rock stacks, even out in the ocean. Those rock stacks have Dudleyas on them. Some driftwood, wonderful place to explore. And then I'll leave you finally with a little promotion for the CSSA convention coming up. Jeremy's going to be a speaker there. And I'm going to be a speaker there, but we have lots of other good speakers. It's in San Diego, and it's April 23rd to the 27th of next year, next spring. Great time to come to San Diego. And then here's the list of some of the speakers that we've got anchored in, and really, really good people with good programs, lots of nice tours, lots of fun things to do in San Diego in the spring. So do see if you can make it and come. Finally, if you're interested in getting the book and you haven't gotten it, please contact us at either the email or my Instagram or jeremyshiddenagave.com. And we'll be happy to get you a book. The soft covers are $49.95 plus tax. The hard covers are $69.95 plus tax. I'm charging $10 for shipping because that's what I can do within the US. If you're outside the US, contact me. I'll tell you how to get the book too. Contact Jeremy. Love you to have a copy of our book before we run out. And we'd like to sell some books because we don't want to be in the book storage business. Anything else you want to say, Jer?
No, I think you covered it. Beautiful photographs, Kelly. And yeah, if you want to see more of the photos, if you want to learn more about Dudleya, visit either Kelly or my sites up top, and we got plenty of books still.
Yeah, the book is really strong on photos. Jeremy's got about, that's his cover shot, by the way, and he's turned into an absolutely fantastic photographer. I like to take credit for it, but I can't. But I think I had some influence. And I have a lot of good habitat photos, so there's lots of neat things in there. And when we didn't have a good photo, we fell back on people like Kevin, on Josh, and even Reed Moran. There's a couple of photos from him. Steve McCabe supplied us some photos that we never would have gotten. So it was a real group effort. Our goal was to put out the best book we could on Dudleyas, and I think we did. And, as things go, we have more photos we'd like to add at this point, but maybe round 2. So, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm having a little trouble with my video right now. But I want to echo what I've read in the chat, which is excellent, excellent presentation, excellent photography. And since you can't see me, John, would you take over on asking the Q&A, please?
Which
Me or
John?
John Martinez? You're gonna have to.
John Martinez, I'm sorry.
Okay, let's see. Kelly, those hybrids, aloes are lovely. Hopefully, they're released for some in the future.
Are the aloe hybrids? That's a question.
Yes.
This was a
That's the
Dudleyas
first one.
talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what has happened is that we introduced them to tissue culture, and then we're able to supply them. I keep getting better every year, and the trouble is that the ones that I came up with 2 years ago are the ones they're propagating now. But yeah, there's some new ones coming out very soon, and you just have to keep visiting back. Most of them will be released at Oasis or at Waterwise Gardens, and then contact Almonds and ask for them. If you ask for them, maybe they'll start making more of them. Would love that. Hi,
Okay, thank
John.
you.
See you there.
Okay, let's see. The next one, Calcaroides, is that how you say that? Which ones occur with Dudley?
Calicortus. Yeah.
Calcaroides?
Which ones
for-
occur with?
That's a
Well-
big, that's a big question, because there's a lot of Dudleyas and there's a lot of Calicortus, and it's not unusual to find Calicortus growing with Dudleya, but I mean the list, that would be quite a long list. I
Right.
don't know if you can answer that offhand, but I can tell you in San Diego County it's weedii and splendens that you see mostly, and outside of that, I mean, personally, I'm not well versed enough in Calicortus to tell you that. But
There's only one good book on Calicortus, and it was published by Timber Press a number of years ago.
Yeah, by
It's
Mr.
gone
Parsons.
out of
And he
print.
actually has some photos in our book too.
Yeah. But
Yeah, he's a great photographer.
Telos Rare Bulb sells them, and
Mm-hmm.
they're about the only good source that I know of for them. The others are hit or miss, but there's quite a number of, there's at least 20 different species of Calicortus that grow along the coast in California.
I was looking for a new population not far from where John Martinez lives of parva. And I looked at some rocks and they looked really promising. And I hiked up there and I'm going, it's got to be here. This is the right space. It should be here. Absolutely. And I got up to the first set of rocks and there was no Dudleyas at all. And I got up to the second set of rocks and there was no Dudleyas at all. And I looked across and I go, oh, there's a Calicortus there. Well, at least this hike isn't absolutely wasted. So I walked over to this Calicortus, and mind you, this is in like north of LA and Agora Hills general area, that area. And I hiked over to the Calicortus, and the Calicortus was growing out of a Dudleya. It was Dudleya parva.
Oh, how
So
cool. Yeah.
that is kind of fun. It's like, if I do see Calicortus, I might look a little harder for Dudleyas. When they are in bloom, they're quite stunning. But I've noticed Calicortus with Dudleyas down in Point Loma, up in the Sierra Nevadas. We even found some Calicortus up with Agave utahensis up in Shoshone area. So they just kind of an extra fun thing, but you have to be there at the right time. They're generally early spring bloomers, but that's when Dudleyas bloom often. So those May, June trips or the April, May, June trips, that's when you're going to see them.
Kelly, I have a question about what's been done with the genetic research on Dudleyas, because it looks to me like there's so much variation in populations that there must be some good genetics to study there.
There is, and it's getting better. The issue that a lot of people have had with this is they'll do like sequencing, genetic sequencing, and they'll take a sampling and they'll get 3 different gene counts. And So then it just makes it harder because you're like, it's not conclusive. And what are you looking at? Are you looking at a hybrid plant mixed in, and then you're still subject to interpretation of the data. But I think it gets a little better. And I think that a lot of the genetic stuff to me is just another little notch in the belt. You have flower comparisons you can make. You have pollination studies. When do they bloom? Are they geographically separated from other species? You have a lot of things that'll help you determine species. But if you have Simosas up in the mountains and near Carmel and San Francisco area, and you have them down in San Diego, they're widely separated, but yet there's some characteristics that seem to unify them. And again, I wouldn't balk too much at naming them as different subspecies because they're clearly geographically isolated. They're not interchanging genes between those two populations. So they are different. It's just, are they different enough? And I guess that falls a lot to what your definition of a species is. And if it's just a minor difference that gives you a species, then that's what happens.
There's a lot of questions here about growing Dudleyas in pots, especially the coastal species. Do you have any recommendations for that?
Well, I live coastally in Carlsbad, La Costa area, so I have an easy time growing them anywhere because it's very similar to what they're used to generally. And San Diego is kind of the center of distribution of Dudleyas. When you go north and south, it's pretty much equidistant. So we're in the middle ground of Dudleyas. That said, the ones like Saxosa Calme in Arizona, I have a tough time growing it. Jeremy, on the other hand, living in kind of the more eastern part of northern San Diego County, he's got better heat. And so if he puts it in his greenhouse, it's happy as a clam. I mean, it just grows really well. So a lot of these things, the keys to growing these things are know where it comes from. The more you know about the plant, the easier it is to grow. A lot of Dudleyas, we try to put them in a pot like this, and then when we water them, all the water settles right in the center. Well, every Dudleya almost that I find grows like this. So one of the tricks that I've done with the ones that are a little more sensitive is you just put a wedge or a rock under it, a pot, and grow it kind of crooked. And that helps because that's kind of what it's used to. So the ones that are tricky, yeah, there's little tricks you can play with them. The ones that are easy, you can't hardly kill. Noma is one that is just gone crazy. It was the one we used to call white sprite. And Jeremy has introduced a lot more flavor to that species by, growing some seed cultivars that are different. They're the seed basically showing the representation of the species. Whereas before, all we had was one clone that was cut up and cut up and cut up. And it was very monoculture of this plant. We now have more forms of that. And I think they're very interesting. I think there's a lot of cultivars that could be made there. And then there's also potential to make those hybrids, cross the Noma with a Brittany and see what you get. So.
And there's a question here that asks, what are your recommendations for cleaning and collecting the seed, maybe pollinating your own plants? Do they outcross? And what's the best way to then germinate that seed? Or is there a method that you particularly like?
Jeremy, you've grown them from seed.
Yeah, not extensively. I actually send most of my seed to Nick Deinhardt because for room purposes. But that was a lot of questions in there. The best time to grow Dudleyas is when they're growing in the wild. So setting seed in October, which is about when rains begin in California. That'll give you the best results. I've done the bag method where you sterilize the soil and put down maybe a little bit of chicken grit, little rocky pelt on top of the soil, and put your seed down and seal it up in a bag and just allow for the seeds to germinate. What were the other, like how to pollinate? Was that another one of those questions in there?
Yeah, how would you recommend pollinating, collecting that seed and cleaning it, preparing it for germination?
Oh, okay. Well, collecting is quite easy once you know what it looks like, because you take these little dried flowers, and when you break them apart, it almost looks like there's nothing in there. There's no hard seed. But if you've ever seen something like an echeveria seed, or if you've seen dust, that's about what it looks like. It's these tiny little seeds that come out that are sort of elliptical shaped, and that's your seed. But in terms of pollinating Dudleya, I don't pollinate Dudleyas. I've never done a Dudleya cross. I have Dudleya crosses that pop up in my garden all the time, thanks to humming. But I think the best way for something small with a small flower like a Dudleya would be to use a small paintbrush if you wanted to cross pollinate them. But Steve McCabe has done quite a few Dudleya crosses and had great success with it, as has had Kelly. So, but that's one area that I don't step into.
Yeah, so
Okay.
if I'm sowing them, I usually use a closed container. I use sterilized soil, scatter granite grit on the top, and then spread the seed and mist it in with sterile water, and then close it up. And I do it generally in the fall because these things usually become more active when the night temperatures drop, and that's a good time for growing them. They like the 40, 50 degree nights, and that helps. They do grow all the way through winter and into spring, and by the end of spring you have a pretty good sized plant. Then it'll probably go sleep, but the second season they put on a lot of growth, and that's when you really have plants. Jared, there's a question here in the Q&A. Will the agave book be reprinted? What's your schedule on that?
Yes. Well, the agave book, the second edition is completed, and it is with the designer now, just putting it, well, so I shouldn't say quite completed. I've completed my part, and the designer has it now, and he's just kind of fixing up a few small things. It will be sent to print in probably about a month, and we should have books for sale again in about 3 months' time. So
I'm at the convention.
at the convention for sure, and hopefully by Christmas too. So yeah.
Okay, great.
Kelly, we have a question here. Someone's asking, what is the difference? How can you tell the difference between a poached plant and a seed-grown plant?
It can be difficult, but generally the poached plant, they are selling them oftentimes on a website, and they don't have any soil and they're not in any pots. I mean, that's a good indication. If you look at a lot of the sites that are overseas that are selling Dudleyas, the other thing is that a commercially grown Dudleya should sell somewhere between 50 and $15 and $20, maybe $30. If they're asking $180 for something, it's probably a big old plant that's been dug from the wild. So price has a lot to do with it. You know, a large old plant that's been dug from the ground, they're going to charge a lot because there was a lot of effort in digging it from the ground, putting it in a box, sending it somewhere, and sending it back. So they're trying to make more money that way. Generally, a nice sized Dudleya like Farinosa at the nursery, we can grow into a nice gallon-sized plant in about 4 years, 5 years. Now, there are ways to grow them more like habitat. You can try growing them in ceramic pots, which gives them a little more of that hardened look. And you can try to grow them a little drier like they would in the wild, where they're just on rock outcrops and getting the salt spray. It's harder to get that red tint unless you really do stress the plant, because those are stress colors. You notice a lot of those ruby red leaves, they're on the older leaves where the ferinosity, the wax, is worn away. And so the plant reacts to that by developing that red color to protect the leaves. And so those are conditions that are stress induced. And, you know, in nature, that's what nature does to it. The plant's capable of doing it. But that would be the biggest thing. And then I saw also, are they deer resistant? They're probably tasty to deer. I've had rodents eat them. I've had rabbits eat them. I would imagine if a deer found them, they would eat them as well. So the way to be deer resistant is plant it on a cliff where they can't reach them, or put it up on a wall, in a pot on a wall, or put them in your greenhouse or someplace where deers don't go.